Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, stressed out Christians who want to do more than just get through the day. I'm Liz Ferricks, and this is my husband, Evan.
Good morning.
We're so glad you guys are here with us on this wonderful Monday.
Yes, we are. It is a wonderful Monday.
It is. The whole week is stretching out in front of us with all kinds of possibilities. It's awesome. As you guys know, we work our way through the CSCs. They are being calm, surrendered, centered, connected, and complete. Adaptations of Peter Ralston's Tai Chi principles. They really have been the difference for us between being in that survival overwhelm mode and being able to really thrive and have freedom and abundance and peace.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, so we learned those Tai Chi principles, but now over the course of this podcast, we look at one principle every day, and we've been doing it for 180 episodes now. Like, that's been so enriching for my life too, is to just have it always in the forefront of my mind. And that's what this show is supposed to be. It's supposed to help us remember what's important. And these principles are key to the Christian spiritual life. And
right.
I don't know. I'm having a lot of fun just making this show, and hopefully it's edifying to listen to.
Yeah, well, I know I need that reminder every day to be like, yep, still important. Still important. Mm-hmm. Still important.
Yeah, and, so it may sound bizarre to talk about the same 5 topics every week for almost a year now, but, like we're talking about forgiveness this week. We talked about faithfulness last week. Like, each of these big topics, there's 1,000 ways to apply the principles, because it's just kind of the way it works.
So like Evan said, this week we were talking about forgiveness. So today we thought we'd talk about bitterness, because what better way to steal your calm and make you miserable?
Whew, yeah. And this is a big one. Bitterness is hanging on to something that somebody did, somebody wronged you in the past, and it becomes a burr in your saddle, right?
Right. Well, I think it's so hard. At least for me, it was such a stumbling block because, it's a legitimate hurt.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like somebody, didn't hurt you or didn't, break your boundaries or whatever. Like, somebody did something that you should be upset about. Mm-hmm. So there was that piece where it was like, okay.
Yeah, but isn't this a legitimate thing, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think bitterness comes up when we can't let go of it. So a real thing happened, but then years later, we're hanging on to it for some reason. We feel like it's never been completely resolved, or that they've never changed, right? Like they've never did what they were supposed to do. And why don't they understand how much that hurt me? Like, these are sometimes very open-ended questions that we may never get a good answer to. But that's what makes it so easy to hang on to bitterness, because we want them answered. We want these questions resolved in our mind. Yeah. And so then, therefore, we're hanging on to this hurt too, and keeping the wound open. Yeah.
There's definitely, there are so many layers to forgiveness. We were just talking about this earlier today with how, there's a situation where I feel like I've gone through the forgiveness process, but I still have a lot of confusion around it.
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly having to be like, there's the confusion and the temptation to go back into that place of hurt and anger, where I just have to keep going, okay, Lord, you're sovereign. You have good plans. You can work this out for good. Just like Joseph said to his brothers, after they sold him as a slave into Egypt, and then he becomes second in command over all Egypt, and they come and buy food from him, and he ends up revealing himself, and he says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. God can take things that somebody else meant to be painful and mean and whatever, and transform those things into something that's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard when there's that confusion piece. And I think too...
Well, and how many years was it in between when Joseph got sold into slavery? And
a long time.
Maybe 20, 30 years. Who knows? A long time. And all that time, it's like, okay, God, he was in prison for a little while, and then he rose through the ranks of power. But even then, I'm sure he still, hadn't seen his family in however long, and probably wondering how they're doing, and still feeling like, I shouldn't even be in Egypt here.
Right.
So I think sometimes we are not going to know really what what's going on.
Right.
And it's important to engage in the process of forgiveness anyway, because if we're like, oh, I'll do it when I know exactly, what all this,
The factors.
that's going to be too late.
Yeah. And likewise with the I'll forgive them once they've apologized. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes people never apologize and you just have to move on and you have a choice. You can drag them around. That's what bitterness does. It's like tying you so securely to this person that you want nothing to do with a lot of the time.
Oh, sure.
You're like, I just want to be free. I just want to move on. And instead, your bitterness keeps you chained to them.
Yeah, if your forgiveness is conditional, then you're going to be stuck.
Exactly.
And the reason we know that this is a good principle, forgive first, and then, we'll talk about reconciliation later in the week, like sort out the stuff in the relationship later, is because, God commands us. Ephesians 4:32 says, be kind to one another, forgive one another, just as Christ has forgiven you.
Right.
We've got to do that. And like you said, we've just talked about all those bad results of not doing it. Being chained to that person, even though you can't stand them, is a great analogy of how destructive that can be.
And it can make you really sick.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of people forget that, but it just adds this whole layer of stress to your life. They've done different studies on stress and resentment and how those things affect people's health. And they've found that, having that bitterness really does make a difference with your health. One of the examples that I really like is that it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah, that is such a great... you put that in your book, I think, didn't you?
Yes.
Where did you hear about that, or did you just come up with it?
No, I didn't come up with it. I read it in a few different places, but I don't remember what the first place that I read it was.
Yeah, there's a short story in Liz's book, Tales from a Spacious Place, that's all about bitterness. I think it's the first one in the book, and it is a powerful story about that, and that line's in there. I think it's important to also think about, it's so easy to just get fixated on those questions I said earlier, like they did something wrong, they didn't change, they haven't, whatever. But it's like, well, what is it that I actually want to happen? And to try to map that out in your mind might be helpful to realize that maybe you have got this whole convoluted plan of what needs to happen to make things better. And there's no way that's ever happening.
Right.
So another reason to just let it go, right? If you're like, well, they've got to do this 25-step plan and then maybe I'll forgive them and maybe we can have peace again. It's like, no, that's never going to happen. And you're trying to control the situation and you're not in control. And we've been commanded to forgive. You're not even a one-step plan. Forgive first. That's step one, because even if all they have to do is give you back the money they owe you, whatever, we're still not forgiving them and we're still not being obedient.
Yeah, and it's just not worth it. That was what I ended up coming to in my life, because I had a lot of bitterness. And then I realized that it was making me miserable and the other person could care less.
It might not even be on their radar, especially if communication is bad and we're having trouble being assertive.
Even if it was on their radar, they honestly just wouldn't have cared. If they were the kind of people that would have cared, they wouldn't have done what they did. And I think that's the situation a lot of times where somebody does something that's extremely hurtful and painful, and if they're the kind of person that can understand how hurtful and painful it was, they wouldn't have done it in the first place.
Sure. Yeah.
So if you wait for them to understand and to then apologize or to admit that they were wrong, it's just never going to happen.
Yeah, I guess folded in with that, or a slightly different take would be, because there could also just be an accident, and it's like, not even like, what, that would never offend me, but it really affected you somehow, and they're not going to understand that. So anyway, there could be any number of reasons why the person had never asked for forgiveness or seemingly understood what's going on.
Right. And it's exhausting hanging on to it. The reason we're talking about this today is because it really does steal your calm. It's just, you don't even realize how tiring it is hanging on to it until you let go of it, until you have that freedom. And it's so incredible, mind-boggling to realize how much time and energy I was putting towards mental conversations with people and, wishing that they would change and wishing that things were different and being angry and being hurt and all that kind of stuff. And when I let go of it and said, okay, Lord, I'm going to obey you and forgive them, even though, regardless of what they do.
Yeah.
To recognize that forgiveness is completely divorced from reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
That was such an amazing thing that, you can let go of the offense without ever fixing the relationship.
Yeah.
Because reconciliation is, that process of fixing the relationship, that's different from the process of forgiving. And also, it was very helpful for me to recognize that forgiveness doesn't mean pretending that something didn't happen. Because sometimes, a lot of the time in the church, when we talk about forgive and forget, it comes across as, let's minimize what happened. Let's pretend there was no effect on your life,
Yeah, and the effect is great. And it's important to acknowledge that.
Right. And forgiveness means turning them over to the Lord and saying, vengeance is yours. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to try to get vengeance through how I, hold this against them emotionally and mentally, through how I treat them, none of that stuff. I'm going to let you be the one that is in charge of punishing them however they need to be punished and changing their life however it needs to be changed, instead of trying to control that myself. It's a very different perspective on how, growing up, what I was taught about forgiveness.
Yeah, because if we're going to try to forgive and forget like God does, we're going to set ourselves up for failure.
Right. Well, and God doesn't, when you look at the cross, like, God never says sin doesn't have a pain. Sin doesn't have a penalty. Sin doesn't have a cost. Like, he's very open about the cost of your sin is my son's life. Mm-hmm. So there's no minimizing. I don't know. I love that so much after being in so much bondage because of all these false perspectives on forgiveness.
Yeah. I think that minimizing goes, when we do introspection as well. And this is one thing that helps me overcome bitterness is, what if others were remembering my sin and hanging on to it the same way I am with them, right? Like, I'm holding this bitterness in my heart because of something they did. What if someone is holding a bitterness in their heart because of something I did? And I wouldn't want that. And so it's a vicious cycle. The psalm I'm thinking about is Psalm 5:3, and it says, it's a prayer to God. It says, I acknowledge my transgression. My sin is ever before my eyes. So I think it becomes easy to judge others and may hang on to bitterness when we're not really in touch with our own sinfulness too.
Yeah.
And it's easier to forgive that's in the Lord's Prayer, right? Help me forgive others as you've forgiven me. Like, if we understand the depth of our own sin and God's forgiveness to us, then why wouldn't we forgive other people for the little sins against us?
Well, hopefully that gives us all some stuff to think about. If you have experience with that false perspective of forgiveness, I just so encourage you to, go back to the Bible, see what God says about forgiveness, pray about, having him give you a correct perspective of forgiveness in whatever issues you're still hanging on to, because it's amazing just letting go of those and being like, you are in control of that. I am going to move on with my own life. As always, pick whether today is going to be awesome or not, whether you're going to strengthen those neural pathways to look for good things or strengthen the neural pathways to look for bad things, because you have a choice, and your choice affects how your day will go. We love you guys, and we are praying for you. Thanks to everybody that's been listening to the show and sharing the show. We really appreciate it. If you have found this podcast helpful, please do continue to share it. And come back tomorrow, and we are going to keep talking about forgiveness, and we're going to talk about how it's not optional.
Yeah.
It's going to be great.
Yeah. But that should be reassuring and encouraging, and it will be.
Yes. All right. Have an awesome Monday, you guys.
See you guys.